Hello everyone and welcome! And here it is, the last story of Piltover and Zone for now. Since the entire structure of the two cities changed, it only makes sense for Zac's story to change too. And although I really like the original story, I have to say the new one is much deeper. So without further ado, let's look at the new Zac. Years ago, it was the Zoanite children who first made contact with Zac. They were skipping rocks over a sump pool, but sometimes the rocks were thrown back. This is how it got its name, the Returning Pool. It became well known to Zone sump dwellers, and eventually it drew the attention of a shadowy cabal of Chemtech alchemists. The locals protested against their plans, but the alchemists ignored them and pumped out the contents of the pool. They brought it back to their laboratory where they began their series of experiments. There they discovered that the mass from the pool had psychotropic tendencies, or in other words, it mirrored whatever stimulus was provided to it. If they treated it well, it responded in a childlike glee and playfulness. But when they tested its response to pain and aggression, they lost numerous augmented sump scrapers in the following destruction. Most of the alchemists thought it was nothing more than reflexes, but two among them weren't so sure. They questioned the morality of these experiments, seeing how it responded with such unmatched aggression. When the pair dug further, they discovered that the project was being founded by Saito Takeda, a chem baron with notoriously violent temperament and reputation for bloody gang wars. Takeda wanted the alchemists to develop a fighter who could shrug off mortal wounds, squeeze into places humans couldn't, and who would obey any command. They also discovered the name of this project, the Zone Amorphous Combatant. As the experiment continued, the two alchemists saw more than just a gel mirroring whatever was happening. They noticed it changed behaviors even without any obvious stimulus, just like any other sentient being. And because every other living being has a name, they called it Zac. Later they told the leader of their research team about their findings, but they were ignored. Unwilling to continue in these immoral experiments, secretly the two alchemists began their own research. They showed Zac what was right and what was wrong, and exposed him to altruism and generosity. Soon, Zac began to show sadness when one of the researchers hurt her hand, and he reacted badly when another one killed a rat in the laboratory. Eventually, they could no longer tolerate what was happening, and they took the matter into their own hands. One night during Zone's Progression Day Remembrance, when the laboratory was empty, they drained Zac into a wheeled septic tank and dragged him to a far distant part of Zone. When their act was discovered, Baron Takeda's men spread around the city and looked for them. But Zone is a big place, and the researchers were able to hide. They wanted to give Zac his freedom, but Zac didn't want to be released. He now considered the two researchers his family. They alone had shown him kindness, and he wanted to learn more from them. In truth, they were pleased by his reaction, and they soon considered him their own adoptive son. In order to stay hidden from Takeda's men, they changed their identities and appearance. They found a place where they could live in a remote part of the sump, far from prying eyes. Over time, Zac learned to mimic their voices, and quickly adapted to shift his gelatinous mass into required shapes to form sound. He lived with his parents for many years, hiding when necessary in sump pools or in the cracks of the cliffside rocks. His parents told him about the world he lived in, how it could be beautiful and full of wonders. They showed him the moon rise over the sun gates, the play of rainbow lights bursting from the glass roofs, and the vibrant beauty of the city's heart. They also explained how the world could be cruel and harsh, and Zac learned that people were sometimes mean and unkind, hateful and prejudiced. That's why he decided to help his parents wherever he could, as they used their skills to aid people around them. Together, they did what they could to treat the sick, mend broken machinery, or otherwise put their chem knowledge to use. These were the golden years for Zac, and he roamed Zone through its almost limitless network of pipes and through the many cracks in the bedrock. As much as Zac was a sentient being, too much stimulus from the environment could sometimes overwhelm his senses, causing him to absorb the dominant emotion around him, being good or bad. He often couldn't help getting involved in helping people bullied by the thugs of Zone, which led to rumors about his presence spreading around the city. But majority of the stories about Zac were about how he helped people during many of Zone's disasters. Eventually, the rumors reached the ears of Saito Takeda, and he immediately sent his augmented thugs to get back what he thought was his property. His alchemists tried to replicate Zac from the droplets they left behind, but without success, leaving Takeda with no other option than to take Zac by force. His heaviest augmented men surrounded Zac's parents' home and attacked. They fought back. Being Chemtech researchers gave them means to defend themselves, but their defiance could not last forever, and eventually they were killed, despite Takeda's order to capture them alive. Fortunately, Zac wasn't home. He was on a trip around the city when he sensed his parents' distress and raced back through the pipes. When he arrived, unstoppable fury overwhelmed him when he saw the dead bodies of his parents. Zac attacked in a ferocious display of stretching, smashing and crushing. In his grief and anger, he demolished dozens of nearby houses, and by the time the battle was over, all the augmented thugs were dead. When the fury drained and Zac regained his consciousness, he vowed to continue the good work done by his parents. He helped rebuild what he had destroyed, but as soon as the work was done, he vanished into Zone's pipe network. Zac now lives alone in the tunnels and caverns throughout Zone. He learns from the emotions of the city's people. Sometimes this enriches him, but sometimes it saddens him, as he takes both the good and the bad of the city. He has become something of an urban legend among the people of Zone, a mysterious creature that appears and disappears into the cracks in the rock or damaged pipework. Most times, this is to help those in need, but in times of trouble, when the moods turn grim, he does too. One evening, Zac was on his usual way through the city. People started coming back from work and the smell of hot meal filled their houses. As he traveled around the rocks of the factory wood, he felt their emotions. Love from a man going home to his newborn son. The anticipation of a married couple looking forward to a romantic dinner in the boundary markets. Zac enjoyed their thoughts, but there were always few people in the mix who weren't so happy. Some people were nursing broken hearts, while others couldn't stomach the thought of another shift. He absorbed the good and the bad, and he remembered his parents told him that sometimes it is okay to feel bad. Without the bad, he couldn't properly savor the good. Zac followed the crowd of people until they started to go separate ways. Some of the negativity rubbed on him, and he decided to do something good to push it away. He seeped down through a network of cracked vents he wanted to repair for quite some time. As he traveled through the inside, he collected fragments of metal into his body, and when he got near a crack, he pushed the metal pieces inside and heated his body to weld them in place. Once he was done, he felt the clean air flowing through, and he was happy to hopefully ease the pain of the citizens' lungs. He continued to the other end of the pipe and he ended up in the upper levels of the sump. A place where things weren't nice and people didn't have much of anything. The view reminded him of his past in the laboratory, and because he wanted to avoid anger, he decided to visit his favorite cleft in the rock, the one beneath the skylight commercia. People were always having good time there. But as he passed beneath the outlying streets, a spike of anguish hit him. A tremor of fear and pain disturbed his liquid flesh, and he didn't like it. He was confused for a moment. He was expecting these emotions deep in the sump and not here, where these things don't happen. The thought angered him even more, and he followed the bad feeling so he could stop it from spreading. After a while, he ended up below a metalsmith shop. He squeezed into the space under the warped floorboards. He heard angry voices above him, shouts and the sound of a weeping man. He pressed his body against the grid and it broke apart only to reform on the other side. He was now inside the shop without anyone noticing. The owner of the shop was on his knees beside a woman bleeding from a deep wound in her belly. In front of them, 4 thugs trying to get their payment for not smashing their store. Their leader was a big man wearing butcher's apron, a cam lantern in one hand and a meat hook crudely fixed to the stump of his other hand. The other 3 were mere brutes. Their eyes widened when they saw Zac rising over them. He bloated his body and formed a mouth where he thought it should be. He really wanted to hurt these men. The emotions he felt were theirs, but he didn't care. He just wanted to hurt them as badly as they hurt the innocent people.
"This is gonna get messy,"
he said. Zac's right arm shot out, smashing the first thug from his feet. He slammed into the upper bar of the door and didn't get up. A second thug swung a heavy iron club. It hit Zac in the middle and was swallowed by his flesh. Zac reached down, picked him up and hammered him into the ceiling. He dropped back down, with limbs bending in ways even Zac knew they shouldn't. The third one tried to run. Zac grabbed the bars above him and sprang forward. He hammered his feet into his back, squashing him to the ground as their leader sliced the blade of his hook down the center of Zac's back. It hurt. Oh, how it hurt. The pain caused Zac's body to lose cohesion. He fell to the floor in a shower of liquid green ooze. The thug stood over him, a giant smile splitting his face. Zac felt his pride at killing another living being. His pleasure at this destruction empowered Zac. He didn't want to feel like this, it wasn't what he was taught. But to help these people, he needed to use the wrath inside him. While the thug was enjoying his victory, the scattered blobs reformed again. Zac surged from the floor and crashed into him, altering his density to that of a thundering piledriver. They smashed into the wall, the flesh and bone of the man disintegrating at the force of impact. Zac peeled himself from the bloody wall, feeling the anger slowly draining from him. He formed his body into something man-shaped and he felt the mixed emotions from the couple behind him. It was a combination of fear and happiness. Zac knelt beside the woman and she took his hand. The soft touch immediately calmed him. He nodded and placed his hand on her stomach. Heat spread from him as he released a sliver from his body into her wound. He knew he was about to leave a piece of him behind, a piece he could never grow back, but he knew she would live because of him. The portion of his body repaired her damaged flesh, knitting ruptured tissue and regenerating the linking of her stomach. Her husband wiped his hand over the wound. He was shocked to see her skin pink and new. "Thank you," she said. Zac didn't answer. He couldn't. Expending so much power drained him. He loosened up and flew back down through the grid into the pipes. This is all he could do to maintain his form as he poured down through the cracks in the rock, heading towards the place he knew would fill him with good emotions. He needed to renew himself. He needed to feel all the good Zone had to offer. He needed to feel alive. He needed to feel. And that was the last story of Piltover and Zone for now. I hope you enjoyed our little trip through the city. Or should I say cities. It already feels like ages when we talked about Camille, and now look where we ended up. From high society right into the dirty sump. As always, if you'd like to see more stories like this one, you can subscribe together with the bell button for immediate notifications. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook or join our Discord if you are the chattier type of person. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video and for your feedback. And as always, thank you come again.
Squashing time!